Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we'll be analysing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 12th March 2019. The topics to be discussed today are reflected on your screen and the timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. So let's begin. This news appears on page number 18 and says that the World Health Organization has released a new global strategy to fight influenza. This news discussion will fall under your GS paper 2 in the category of issues related to health. Now, the WHO's Global Influenza Strategy for 2019 to 2030 is a strategy which aims at protecting people in all the countries from the threat of influenza. The WHO describes influenza as one of the world's greatest public health challenges. The reason is that the influenza epidemic affects around 1 billion people and kills hundreds and thousands of people annually according to WHO. The three broad aims of this strategy is firstly to prevent seasonal influenza. The reason why influenza is mostly considered seasonal is because influenza, which is also commonly called as the flu, mostly occurs in the winters. Though the virus which causes influenza is present all year round, but in winter as the air is drier and colder, the virus is able to survive in such environment for a longer period of time, and even the human body's tendency to fight against this virus is comparatively reduced in winters. Hence, WHO's first aim is to prevent this seasonal influenza which comes back every year during winters. The second aim is to control the spread of the influenza from animals to humans. Now, the influenza virus actually originates in animals like birds, pigs, etc. Hence, the main carrier or the main reason why humans get this virus is because it is transmitted from the animals itself. Hence, WHO wants to control the spread of this influenza virus from animals to humans. The third aim is to prepare for the next influenza pandemic. The word pandemic means the worldwide spread of a disease. As per the WHO, the threat of a pandemic influenza is ever present. So, as per the WHO, an influenza pandemic is inevitable. Hence, for influenza, it is generally said that the question is not whether we'll have another influenza pandemic or not, but the question is when. So, realizing the fact that the risk of a new influenza virus transmitting from animals to humans is potentially real, the researchers are very sure that even in the future, we are going to have another influenza pandemic. Earlier also, in the year 1997, there was the avian flu pandemic, and even in the year 2009, we had the swine flu pandemic. Hence, for WHO, another influenza pandemic will happen. So, the only option which the countries or the world have is to prepare for such a pandemic, because preventing another influenza pandemic is not really possible. Moving ahead, this new strategy is one of the most comprehensive and far-reaching one that WHO has ever developed for influenza. Hence, WHO has provided two overarching goals or means through which these aims can be achieved. Firstly, the new strategy calls for every country to have a tailor-made influenza program. By tailored, we mean that every country should have a program which is very specific and suited for its condition only. That is, the program should be devised keeping in mind the ground realities of that country. Further, the WHO says that having such tailor-made influenza program will help to strengthen the capacity for disease surveillance and response, prevention and control, as well as the preparedness for the next influenza pandemic. Hence, if a country can have a tailored influenza program for itself, then that country can contribute to the national as well as the global preparedness and health security as far as influenza is concerned. The second is that the WHO wants the countries to develop better tools to prevent, detect, control and treat influenza. And for this, they want that more effective and accessible vaccines, antivirals as well as treatments should be developed. The nature of the influenza virus is such that the strains keep on mutating. Hence, the vaccine formulas have to be regularly updated, and in a way they offer only a limited protection. Therefore, what is required is to have more effective vaccines, and secondly, the vaccines which are developed should be accessible to all the people in all the countries. Moreover, WHO puts so much of stress on the second strategy is because the annual influenza vaccine is the most effective way to prevent influenza currently. So as far as influenza is concerned, though mitigating efforts can be of some use, But the best way to prevent this disease is to have the annual vaccine against it. Lastly, talking about what exactly is the influenza. Influenza or the flu is an acute viral infection of the respiratory tract. So hence influenza is a viral infection caused due to the influenza virus, which is a single-stranded RNA virus. This virus can be transmitted by direct contact with infected individuals or even through animals who are its host carriers. So animals, especially the wild birds, are the natural host for the influenza virus. Therefore, controlling the spread of the influenza virus from animals to human was one of the aim of this global influenza strategy. Next, influenza is caused by three types of RNA viruses, namely influenza type A, B and C. Now the most common type of influenza, that is H1N1, H1N2, H3N2, etc., are caused due to type A. And it is usually these type A viruses which cause pandemics. On the other hand, type B virus does not cause an influenza pandemic. The influenza C virus is not very common and it only causes a mild respiratory illness and usually does not cause epidemics. With this, let's move on to our next news. This news appears on page number 8 and is talking about the coordinated efforts of all the central banks across the world to put brakes on increasing the interest rate. This news will fall under GS paper 3 under the topic of issues related to the economy. So basically in this article, what the author is saying is that the central banks across the world have started to put brakes on increase in the interest rates. And as per the author, while such coordinated money policies can prevent economic slowdown, it may have an adverse impact in the long run. First, let us understand the background to this situation. In order to combat the 2008 global economic recession or the financial crisis, the developed economies across the world started to follow a very unconventional monetary policies, such as the zero interest rate policy and the negative interest rate policy. This zero interest rate policy was followed by USA in the wake of the financial crisis in order to inject money into the economy to promote economic growth. So under this policy, the US Federal Bank was providing loans to the other banks at an almost zero interest rate, that is of 0.25%. The second one was the negative interest rate policy. This policy was followed in the developed countries like Japan, Denmark, Sweden, Switzerland, etc. So usually what happens is that banks store their surplus reserves with the central bank in order to earn interest from the central bank. However, under this negative interest rate policy was that the banks would be required to pay interest to the central banks if they were keeping their surplus reserves with the central banks. So the basic idea here was that the banks should provide loans to the people rather than keeping it with the central banks to earn interest. Moving ahead, subsequently what happened? Due to these unconventional monetary policy measures, the growth of the economy picked up momentum, and then countries like the USA tried to normalize their monetary policies, whereby they started to increase the interest rates. So once the countries came out of the financial crisis, they reversed their monetary policy stance and thereby started to increase the interest rates. However, some of the economists have argued that this normalization of monetary policy stance had an adverse impact on the US economy. Hence, some economists suggest that there are signs of slowdown in the GDP growth rate as well as a slowdown in the job creation. Further, various economists suggest that it is not just the US economy but the entire global economy which is showing signs of economic slowdown. And this has been corroborated by various international reports as well. Hence, in order to avoid this slowdown, countries across the world have been following an easy monetary policy so that they can inject money into their economy in order to promote growth. For instance, the European Central Bank has decided to maintain lower rates of interest for another 1 year at least. Further, the Chinese Central Bank has promised further monetary stimulus measures. In fact, even the RBI has decided to reduce its benchmark policy rate or the repo rate. Therefore, it is obvious that the central bank across the world are reversing the direction of their monetary policy, wherein they are either lowering the interest rate, and if not lowering, then at least they have stopped increasing the interest rate. And what is of importance is to note that such efforts or steps by all these countries are happening in a coordinated manner. And this coordination cooperation is provided by the countries in order to avoid a global or a world economic slowdown. But in this article, the author says that while such coordinated monetary policies can prevent a slowdown, but such sustained lower interest rates can have an adverse impact in the long run. So, according to the author, this can lead to an increase in the money supply in the long run, and this could lead to adverse impact such as accumulation of higher debt as well as a higher rate of inflation. Because we all know the basic concept of economy that if the interest rates are lower, then the borrowings or the loan which are given out will increase. And when the loans increase, the money which people have in their hands for disposal will also increase. And when the money supply increases, eventually the prices in the economy also increases, leading to high inflation rates. And secondly, also very logically, if the loans are increasing, then the debt also would increase. And hence the author feels that in the long run, there will be accumulation of very high debts and even high rate of inflation. So this was all what this article was talking about. With this, let's move on to our next news. This news appears on page number 1 and says that a species of the wood snake, which wasn't seen in 140 years, has resurfaced in the Meghamalai Wildlife Sanctuary. This news can be of importance from the perspective of your prelims in the category of environment. Now, recently a finding has been published in the Journal of the Bombay Natural History Society, which talks about the resurfacing of a particular species of the wood snake in the Meghamalai Wildlife Sanctuary and the Periyar Tiger Reserve. Now, this species of the wood snake was last spotted and recorded in 1878 by a British naturalist who went on to describe it as a new species. Now, what is to be noted is that this species of the wood snake is point endemic. By point endemic, it means that it is only found in the Meghamalai region. Please do not get confused as to how this snake was found in the Periyar Tiger Reserve if it is point endemic to Meghamalai only. The reason is that, as we will be discussing further, is that this Periyar and Meghamalai Wildlife Sanctuary belong in the same region only. Let us now discuss a few points about the Meghamalai Wildlife Sanctuary. The Meghamalai Wildlife Sanctuary is located in the Western Ghats in the state of Tamil Nadu along the Tamil Nadu-Kerala border. The second point, as we were talking before, is that the Meghamalai Wildlife Sanctuary borders the Periyar National Park or the Periyar Tiger Reserve, which is located in Kerala. Now, this Periyar National Park is notable because it is both an elephant and a tiger reserve. Hence, this Meghamalai Wildlife Sanctuary provides an important buffer zone for the tigers in the Periyar National Park, and it also acts like an elephant corridor for the elephants in the Periyar National Park. As far as the biodiversity which is found in the Meghamalai Wildlife Sanctuary, this sanctuary is notable for the Nilgiri tahar, which is the state animal of Tamil Nadu, and also has good numbers of the lion-tailed macaque, and is also one of the very few places where the Great Indian Hornbill is found in the ground level forests. Thus, to recapitulate, you need to remember that the species of the wood snake which has been resurfaced here is point endemic to the Meghamalai region. And as far as the Meghamalai Wildlife Sanctuary is concerned, you need to remember its location. That is, it is found in Tamil Nadu. Second, that it borders Periyar National Park and hence serves as a good buffer zone for the tigers as well as an elephant corridor. And lastly, that the Nilgiri tahar, lion-tailed macaque as well as the Great Indian Hornbill are some of the few notable species found in the Meghamalai Wildlife Sanctuary. With this, let's move on to our next news. This next news has been taken from page number 13 and is talking about a report by the CRISIL where it says that the government policy has heard the developer sentiments in the solar energy sector. This discussion will fall under GS paper 3 in the category of energy. The context of this article is that India has set an ambitious target of achieving 175 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity by the year 2022. This includes 100 gigawatt from the solar, 60 gigawatt from the wind, 10 gigawatt from biopower and 5 gigawatt from small hydropower. However, in this article it is said that the government may be able to achieve only 60% of this 100 gigawatt target by 2022 due to faulty government policies, which has now hurt the developer sentiment. This article is highlighting two main concerns related to government policy. One is regarding the imposition of the safeguard duty, and the second is the impact of GST on the solar projects. To better understand this government policy, we first have to go into the background, that is, what was the earlier regime, especially pre-GST. Now, in the earlier regime, as far as imported solar cells were concerned, there was imposition of basic custom duty on the import of these solar cells, but then there was no additional custom duty, and again there was no safeguard duty. But in the current scenario, in addition to retaining the basic customs duty, the government now imposes on these imported solar cells as well as levies a safeguard duty as well. Now in July 2018, the government has imposed a safeguard duty of 25% on all imported cells and modules. This was done in order to promote the domestic manufacturing of the solar cells or modules. But this in turn has led to an increase in the capital cost of the solar energy projects by almost 10 to 15%. Now a safeguard duty is a form of a temporary duty or a relief. They are basically used when the imports of a particular product, in this case the solar cells, increases unexpectedly to a point that they cause or threaten to cause serious injury to the domestic producers. Hence, this safeguard duty is imposed in order to promote the domestic manufacturing of that good, and hence in a way this safeguard duty gives domestic producers a period of grace to become more competitive vis-a-vis the imports. This safeguard duty is something like a temporary trade barrier and is also approved by the WTO. But please bear in mind that this is only temporary, that is for a short duration of time only. Now in addition to the safeguard duty, the imposition of GST on various solar components has also led to increase in the capital cost of the solar power projects. As discussed, prior to the GST regime, the solar modules were exempted from the additional custom duties and the VAT in several states. This VAT was applicable for the domestically produced solar cells, while the additional custom duty was applicable on the imported solar cells. Now, however, post the implementation of the GST, in addition to the basic custom duty which an importer was paying, they also now have to pay the additional IGST component on the imports. Now, it is a misbelief of many people that this IGST is only for the domestic interstate trade. But in reality, this IGST is also imposed on the products which are imported from outside. Therefore, even import is somehow treated like the interstate movement of goods. Further, for the domestic solar cells, the VAT has now been replaced by the SGST, which is applicable in all states, and the producers have to pay it. So as you can see, in the earlier regime, for the imported solar cells, only the basic custom duty was required. But now in the current scenario, in addition to the basic custom duty, our importer would also have to pay the IGST as well as the safeguard duty. And for the domestic solar cells, in the earlier regime, a lot of states had given exemption from the VAT for the domestic solar cells. But under the current scenario, all the domestic solar cell producers have to pay the SGST. So you see, all of this is leading to the increase in the capital cost as far as the solar power projects is concerned. With this, let's move on to our next news. This news appears on page number 18 and is in the context of the 4th session of the UN Environment Assembly, which is holding its 4th session in Nairobi, Kenya. In this session of the UN Environment Assembly, the participating countries are looking forward to sign a global deal which will help curb plastic pollution. The reason is that in the field of plastic pollution, there is no concrete agreement or a deal which specifically aims at curbing plastic pollution. For example, for climate change, we have the specific Paris Agreement. So hence, for this time's assembly session, the focus is to come out with such specific deal or agreement which solely curbs on tackling plastic pollution. So in this assembly session, the United Nations wants the individual countries to sign up a deal which will significantly reduce plastic production. Additionally, the assembly wants to come out with the first ever deal which will focus on phasing out the single-use plastic by the year 2030. So if everything goes according to the plan, then by end of this forum's discussion, we might just have a first ever deal for phasing out single-use plastic by 2030. For information, you should know that single-use plastics are disposable plastic items which are used only once, that is for a single time, before they are thrown away or recycled or discarded. Common example of a single-use plastic would be plastic cups, plastic water bottles, disposable plastic cutlery, etc. Now this 4th session of the UN Environment Assembly has just begun, So this will be a news in transition, and we would have to wait for this assembly to get over to see what all concrete developments have taken place in reality. But from the perspective of your exam, you should know a few things about the UN Environment Assembly. The UN Environment Assembly is the governing body of the UNEP, that is the United Nations Environment Programme. Secondly, this UN Environment Assembly is the highest decision-making body on the environment in the world. This assembly brings together entrepreneurs, governments, NGOs, activists, and other stakeholders to share ideas and come out with new commitments which will help save our environment. Another thing to remember is that this assembly meets once in every 2 years, that is biennially. And in their meetings, they discuss the agenda for global environmental policies and also develop various international environmental law for the better and faster implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals which have been set by the United Nations. So with this, let's move on to our next news. This news appears on page number 5 and says that the Sirsi Supari has got the geographical indications tag. From the perspective of our syllabus, it will fall under the section of science in your preliminary examinations. Now, the Sirsi Supari is the first one in the areca nut sector to get a GI tag. That is to say, it is for the first time that areca nut or the supari has got a GI tag. This Sirsi Supari is grown in the Sirsi and Yelapur taluk of the Uttara Kannada district in the state of Karnataka. The unique feature of this areca nut is that it has a very unique taste due to difference in its chemical composition as compared to other areca nuts. Further, this Sirsi Supari is ash colored and has a very hard seed. As far as its physical features are concerned, it is round, flattened and in the shape of a coin. All these unique features of the Sirsi Supari, that is its different taste, its ash color and its shape, are the reasons why this Sirsi Supari is differentiated from all other areca nuts or supari which is grown in India, because all these features are not seen in areca nut grown in any other regions. Let us now know a few things about what is a geographical indications tag. The geographical indications of good refer to that geographical indication which is the country or the place of origin of that product. To simply say, a geographical indications tag refers to that geographical place or country from where that product has originated. The importance of a GI tag is that this GI tag conveys an assurance of quality and distinctiveness which is attributed specifically to its origin, which means that the product has acquired certain kind of distinct quality or uniqueness only because of the fact that that product is found in that particular place or origin. The GI tag finds mention both under the TRIPS, that is the trade related aspects of intellectual property rights, as well as the Paris Convention for the protection of industrial property. Lastly, since India is a member of the WTO, it enacted the Geographical Indications of Good Act in the year 1999, which got enforced from the year 2003. Another thing to know is that who gives this GI tag? The answer is the Registrar of Geographical Indications. And this Registrar of Geographical Indications comes under the Controller General of Patents, Designs and Trademark under the Department for Promotion of Industrial and Internal Trade, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. With this, let's move on to our next news. This news appears on page number 14 and talks about the Laurus Labs HIV drug which has finally been approved by the US FDA. The same news was covered in the DNS dated 4th February 2019. Therefore, to have more information about this, you can refer to this DNS. With this, let's move on to our practice questions. Now, based on our today's discussion, here is the first set of prelims practice question. Please pause the video and solve them. We'll discuss the answer after 5 seconds. The first question is related to the safeguard duty. The first statement, safeguard duty is a form of temporary relief which is used when imports of a particular product increases unexpectedly to a point that they adversely affect the domestic producers. This is a correct statement. Second, the imposition of safeguard duty is completely prohibited by the WTO. This is incorrect. As we had discussed, WTO also allows the safeguard duty because it is temporary in nature and is required to save the domestic industries. Hence, the right answer is A, one only. Question number 2 is related to the unconventional monetary policies. The first statement, The zero interest rate policy and negative interest rate policy is followed by the countries in order to control high rate of inflation. This statement is incorrect. In fact, it is the opposite. All these unconventional monetary policies was followed to give impetus to the economy and increase the money supply. Hence, these are followed to increase the rate of inflation. Second, no country has so far adopted negative interest rate policy. This is again incorrect. Countries like Japan, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, etc. have followed negative interest rate policy in the past. Hence, the right answer is D, neither 1 nor 2. Here is the second set of prelims practice question. Please again pause the video and we'll discuss the answer after 5 seconds. Question number 3 reads, the Meghamalai Wildlife Sanctuary is located in which state? The right answer is C, Tamil Nadu. Question number 4 is with reference to the Sirsi Supari. The first statement, it is the first areca nut to be granted a GI tag. This is correct. Second, it is grown in the state of Karnataka. This is also right. Hence, the right answer is C, both 1 and 2. With this, we come to an end for today's discussion. Let's move to the question for the day.